historians and scholars of human rights and international humanitarian law, they approach their subject the same way that church historians once approached theirs. Right? They regard the basic cause, just as church historians treated the Christian religion, as a saving truth, right? A salvific process, right? Discovered rather than made in history. And so the heroes who advance human rights in the world, just like the Christian church's apostles and saints, are treated with uncritical wonderment, hagiography, for the sake of moral imitation of those who chase the flame of international humanitarian law and human rights. It becomes the main genre. And the organizations that institutionalize human rights are treated like the early church, a fledgling but hopefully universal community of believers struggling for good in a vale of tears. If the cause fails, it is because of evil. If it succeeds, it's not by accident, but because the cause is just. Well, human rights virtually never succeed as a cause, right? So this is a movement that operates dominantly on myth, which is kind of weird, because when you're trying to make the case for a movement that is new, that is highly contingent, meaning it has no power, and whatever influence and whatever possible power it might have is highly contingent on various nation states deciding to use the human rights crusade for their own purposes. Do you know anyone who's big in human rights who comes from a right-wing background? Do you know anyone who's big in international humanitarian law who comes from a right-wing background? They overwhelmingly come from backgrounds in feminism, Marxism, communism, Leninism, anti-colonialism, right, leftism, right? They are people who become disappointed with left-wing utopian politics such as Marxism and communism, and they're seeking another utopian crusade. And it doesn't really matter to them if it makes absolutely no difference in the real world. And the way they talk about human rights is the same way that a rabbi will give a sermon in an Orthodox synagogue, where you just take it for granted that people are going to accept that the Torah came from God. And so when you say the Torah says, right, even if you're referring to some pronouncement of a rabbi 400 or 800 or 1200 years ago, or the 5 books of the Pentateuch, right? It's still attributable to God, and because this is the setting, right? You get up and you give a sermon in an Orthodox synagogue, and there's a particular pious setting where you attribute things to Torah and to God, and you talk about the great rabbis of the past and the brave parishioners of the past, the ordinary Jews who stood up for Torah, and there's just a certain piety, and there's a certain inspiration level, and so we all need to do better and work together and do one more mitzvah so that we can bring them a Mashiach and hasten the ultimate redemption. All right, but you see that same piety in the world of international humanitarian law and human rights, which is weird because these fields are so brand new. They have no real-world power aside from the possibility of self-aggrandizement, and they are so profoundly shaped by contingency, by culture, by whatever narratives are going on at the time, that you would think that if they wanted to take their cause seriously, that they would be very careful in their pronouncements, because a single overstatement has the power to ruin for the reader or the listener any possible credibility. But the international humanitarian lawyers and the human rights lawyers aren't really interested in making converts among those who think critically, right? They are only speaking to the already converted. And so they take absolutely no care with the accuracy and the clarity and describing the contingency and the contestation of their field and its highly limited real-world applicability, which is stunning, right? Because unless you buy into this utopia